Hello and welcome to our episode 8 of Crystalcast Immigration Podcast. My name is Ross and I'm an immigration lawyer.
My name is Juan. I'm registered immigration agent.
Juan, good to have you on the show. We've got quite a bit to cover today, so let's get straight into it. And now on to our topic of the week, Juan. So this week I thought it would be a good idea for us to discuss the role of migration advisors, what it is that we do, why clients come to us, and I suppose, this interesting concept of what the expectation is and what's the reality in terms of what clients expect us, in terms of what we can do and what we can actually do. So I'm going to ask you a question. What's the most unusual request you've ever gotten from a client?
That's a good question, Ross. I think one of the requests is that if I can give them a specific date as to when the department is going to approve a visa. And trust me, I wish I knew that answer. Because, obviously everyone wants to know, we all want to know when that's going to happen, but this is one of the things that is definitely out of our hands.
Exactly, and I get that all the time as well. Can you give a specific date? Isn't there a number that you can call? I get that as well.
Yes. Oh my God. True.
Surely you can
Yeah.
call a number and find out more information about where our process is up to, when we can expect a visa. But if this is outside our control, then why do clients come to us?
Well, Rosa, I think people come to us because of many reasons. We are on top of the law, on top of the regulations, on top of the updates that constantly happen. Because this is one of those industries that one day the Department of Home Affairs says something, and within a month, the regulations can change or the conditions of a set of visas.
Yeah.
Eligibility can change, so it is our job to be on top. It is our job to know and to inform the clients on how they can meet their eligibility. And from here, we can go into so many other points for us, like.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny that you've mentioned that staying on top of the law. I was just thinking, I recall once I went on a holiday. This was quite some time ago, and I came back, and there was a new visa that was introduced, and it was actually quite an important one. It's now been around for 10 years, but at that stage, I came back into the office. I was severely jet lagged, came back from Europe, and we had to have this massive training session because all of our clients were calling and saying, well, what is this new visa? How do we utilize it? And you basically couldn't start your day because we had to be across the regulations, across the policy, which clients would be impacted, and how do we advise them? Because especially, you and I, we work in a firm where there's a number of staff members, so we kind of need to provide the same advice. If I say one thing and you say another thing, it's just going to cause a lot of confusion. So I agree with you that there's a lot of changes, and even when you're on holidays, things don't stop.
I know. It never stops, Ross. And another thing, I mean, like I can think about so many examples of our own clients and why it is important to have us involved. Another thing I can think of is just the specific rules for immigration. For example, when someone has had a visa refused in Australia,
Yes.
a lot of the time people is not aware that there is an exclusion period.
Yeah.
And it is these details that we're aware of, and then we can provide a tailored advice to these specific clients, so they're not going to make the mistake of wasting their money on an application that is going to be invalid.
Yes.
Their time. And but what about if there is a way to get rid of that?
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know that there can be a waiver for the exclusion period.
Exactly.
How do you do that?
Yeah.
And I think that's when a migration agent or a law practitioner in the migration area comes very handy.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's that strategic advice. There's also, I suppose, a misconception that we fill out forms. I did have someone say to me, well, can you just give me a quote to fill out an application form? And I'm sure there was no malice behind it, but there is that misconception that because we do send forms for review, that that's all that we do. But in order to get to the point of where we actually send you the copy of the draft for you to review and approve, there's a lot of work that goes behind it.
100%. There is a huge work. Like, it's not a matter of how quick either you can just fill up that form. Like you said, like there is a background information that is telling you what to put in the form and in each
and
section
the
of the
why
form
and the why
and
as
the why.
well. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's equally as important what you put in the form as to how you're backing up that information. So it's definitely more than just filling a form.
Exactly. And what about what do you say to people who, they do their own research and then they come in and they say, well, why should I engage you as opposed to doing it myself? I've done all this research online, I've looked at Facebook forums. Why do I need professional help?
Well, you know what? You can definitely be versed or know how to apply for a visa, but there is always going to be details that you have to address. Let's say, for example, a genuineness statement on a direct entry visa, for example.
Yes.
This is a very complicated visa that people have to pay a lot of attention on addressing the need of the position on a company.
Exactly. Yeah.
If the person is not very careful on addressing all of this, they're gonna risk Section 56 request for information that they may
And that's in
not
the
have to.
best case scenario.
Yes,
It could be an
that's
outright
right.
refusal.
That's right. That's right. So it is always on the best interest of the applicant
Yeah. Yeah.
that they come to us, you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, exactly. And it's sort of the reason why I do believe that this is a specialized area. And when I do my CPDs, I always compare it to seeing a doctor. I might know that I'm sick, for example, and I could do a bit of, Dr. Google research, which is, by the way, the worst thing you can do. Um, and I could tailor my own treatment plan. But in having said that, anything could possibly go wrong. And, when you talk about your health, you could get worse. But when you talk about visa, if it gets refused, there's no refund for mistakes.
Yeah.
That's the biggest problem. You're investing money, you're investing time, you're also investing your immigration status. So what you talked about before, the bars and the exclusion periods, they're just so different. You can't give a straight answer. This will attract a bar, this won't. It just depends on the situation, which is why it's so important not to do that sort of self help research and think, well, because my friend did it or because I've read it on Google or on Facebook, I can apply that to my own scenario. It just doesn't work like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Each scenario is different. Each circumstance is very different. And it is always good to have good eyes and mapping out a good strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah, for this.
And I suppose when it comes to mapping out a strategy, how do you manage clients' expectations?
Well, look, it is a matter of knowing when things are being applied for, knowing how long we have before our visa comes to expiry. I think we have to always have a good communication with the client and make them aware. For example, if your visa is expiring in a month, let's say, we need the documentation like well in advance, because what's happened in the past, Ross, is that, for example, this client thought they had a valid English test and it happened to be expired. So they had like about a week to quickly book an IELTS test, get the results for that to be submitted to the department. So it is always important to keep your client in the loop, give them enough time to know those due dates. But also, some clients get a little bit anxious, or like on the opposite. Some can be lazy, but some others can be like all the time, like trying to follow up. When is this going to be completed, or when is that? When is the department going to respond in regards to freedom of information, for example?
That's taking, months at a
Yeah,
time.
yeah. So sometimes I think we have to be a little bit firm, obviously with respect and all the care, but firm with some clients and tell them, that we're taking care of their application and every aspect of it.
Yeah,
And when
yeah.
things are out of our hands, like the freedom of information, that something is not depending on us, let them
Mm,
know as well. Okay, we're equally as eager to have this
of
information,
course, yeah.
but at the same time, it's not in our hands. So it's managing that level of.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think communication definitely is key. Um, and, and I like what you said about trust as well. Sometimes I do feel like we might need to, and again, with respect, remind clients to trust us because that's what we've been engaged to do. So it is about learning to sort of let go and let us do the work, and understanding what's within the control and what's outside our control. And sometimes, well, for me personally, I feel like I'm just repeating myself over and over and over again. But I've got to remind myself that I do this every day. But for a client, it's their only application, so that's all that they think about. And obviously, I can't say, well, I've got 1,000 other things to worry about.
Yeah.
You're not important because that's certainly not the case. But just reminding that you are on my radar, but I can't call this magic hotline
Yeah.
that doesn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely,
And make the
absolutely.
visa come through.
Yeah, no, and I think also, Ross, something I have observed from you, in fact, is have empathy
Yeah.
for your clients. I mean, there are situations where a person might be unlawful in the country,
Mm,
and before we can do something, sometimes we'll have to wait for, I'm gonna bring this again, like a freedom of information. So we have the whole scenario before we can apply for something. And these people may be really anxious.
of course.
I remember, though, you and I had to call a specific client, and I really saw that tone you had with them, this tone of empathy.
Yeah.
And wow, like I really learned from that
Mm,
because I see how the client went from a very anxious tone. They were, after the conversation, hearing you, letting them know, yeah, like, you know what, I feel you, like, I know how hard it will be,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
please know that we're with you, like, we're equally waiting, etc. So I think empathy is a big element as well. Hey.
It is really important because clients do trust us with not just a visa application, and I don't like to use that term because it sounds very transactional. They trust us with their immigration journey, so there needs to be that level of empathy. And the way that I do it, I just place myself in their shoes. And I remember I was waiting for something so trivial. I mean, it didn't impact me in any way at all. But I remember feeling that level of anxiety, thinking, when will this come through? When will I know? And I thought, Jesus, if I've only been waiting for a couple of days, how do my clients feel when they wait for weeks and months? So I really do try to emphasize that I understand where that's coming from. And I just want to assure you that whatever it is that I can do, so maybe if it's just to provide you with an update every couple of weeks, just to check up on you and
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
hey, listen, there's no update, but I'm letting you know that you're still on my radar. And I think it's important to have that because otherwise a situation can escalate. And
Yeah.
a lot of miscommunication happens when there's that expectation. So just going back to that, your client is expecting you to turn stones, and make it happen. And there's the reality in terms of we just can't make it happen.
Yeah.
But it will be done in due course.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. And Rose, we'll have a question this week. I'm gonna read it out for you to answer. So basically, this is what visas are available to applicants that have held an 870 visa, which is expired, and wish to visit Australia while waiting for their second 870 visa to be granted.
Assume that they have spent the required 90 days outside of Australia since their first A70 visa expired.
Good question. So maybe let's break it down and talk about what is an 870 visa. So this visa has now been around for about 5 or 6 years, and it's a sponsored parent visa, and the government has brought this in to basically address the very long time to get a standard parent visa. Now, this type of visa, it's an interesting one because the total period that you can spend on this visa, Juan, is 10 years. So you can either apply for a 3-year visa, a 5-year visa, but the total period can't exceed more than 10 years. And the reason why the 3 months there was mentioned is because when you apply for a parent sponsorship, when the sponsorship expires, there needs to be 90 days between the first and the second sponsorship. So hence the person would need to go offshore in order to lodge another 870 visa. There are limited circumstances under where you can apply onshore, but they are limited. So just in terms of what visa options are available, it just really depends on who we're talking about. So if you've got someone who's under the age of 45, which would be fairly unlikely if it's a parent that's coming, they could potentially look at a longer term option if they're coming for work, maybe a work visa. But generally speaking, in probably 95% of the cases, it would be visitor visa. So assuming that the individual can meet the criteria for genuine temporary stay, it would be a visitor visa. But just to keep in mind as well, at the moment, as part of the migration strategy, the Department of Home Affairs will be imposing Condition 8503 on a number of visitor visas. So depending on what the circumstances are, a person could come here on a visitor visa, go back offshore, and then have that 870 visa processed, and then come back to Australia.
Good. And you see, Ross, like, is these details that if people don't know it, maybe an application could come back invalid.
Exactly.
Or refused, and that is always good to.
It's definitely a more than informed feeling, and and I really do appreciate when people send in these questions because there's more to. I could have just answered this question and said, "Come here on a visitor visa," and just left it at that. And I have had clients ask me before, can you just give me a yes or a no? The reality is we can't do that in our job. And if you do have any questions that you'd like us to answer on our podcast, just send us an email and we'll be able to answer those.
And thank you, Ross. It's been so good to be today speaking, and see you next week.
See you next week.